Hi, everyone. It's Sylvan, and welcome to the Silvates Podcast. I'm really excited for this podcast because it's going to be one of the most personal ones I'll have done yet. And I've got someone really special joining me today. I've got Dr. Julie Shaw joining me, and she is a certified grief educator and founder of the Hello, I'm Grieving brand. By day, she works as a leadership and diversity equity inclusion consultant. Hi, Julie. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. I'm excited. I'm happy that you reached out and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Likewise. And one of the ways that I found you was through Instagram. I remember shortly after my mom had passed, I was looking at resources on Instagram and you were tagged in another account that I was following. And I just indulged your content. I couldn't get enough of it. It felt so personal and so salient. And it felt like you were literally looking at me, telling me this is how you feel, and I get it.
Wow. Wow. I mean, it's incredible for me to hear that because I started Hello, I'm Grieving maybe just last year. And, I started it just for myself. And maybe that's what resonated with you because I think I didn't care if anybody looked at it. I didn't tell anybody I was doing it because I had heard that was a grieving technique that you can use because people are using social media. So somebody recommended, hey, why don't you just start this page and kind of use it as your own therapy to where you can just post. You don't need to tell anybody about it. Try it for 3 months, see what it does for you. And I think it really helped me like as an outlet. And, I think the best parts of different Instagram accounts is when people are just their authentic self. So you really are connecting with people, and that was just my way to express what I was feeling, to connect with other people like yourself, right? Because I think there's this quote that I've heard, your vibe attracts your tribe. And so I think my vibe that I was putting out there was attracting the people and bringing us together. So it's kind of turned into, I started taking it seriously and was receiving all the feedback from folks and could tell that it was making a difference. And I'm just one that wants to help people and give back. So I'm running with it and it's turning into something really great.
And it really is something special to the point where now, you're releasing merchandise. And I want to talk to you a bit more about that because I can see if anyone's watching, you've got the Hello, I'm Grieving sort of sweater on. And some of the stuff that you come out is really cute. Like,
Oh,
I'm like,
thanks.
is she shipping to the UK? Because I really want some of this.
I think so. I'm working on the back end right now, putting it together. But yeah, I think this whole idea, and this is where, I'm sure we'll probably talk about how you feel like people might be judging you when you're grieving, especially if you're so outspoken about it. I'm an outspoken person, anyways. And so it baffled me when I took a look around and people weren't talking about grief, and that I feel like it was something that where we were being silenced and maybe it wasn't where our voices were appreciated or people didn't want to hear about it, and you feel like you're judged if you do, and because a lot of emotions come with that and our emotions need to get out somehow. And so for me, the easiest way, and there's the cliche saying of wearing your heart on your sleeve, or how we wear our emotions. And so just saying hello to grief and just coming out with it and just say hello, I'm grieving, like whatever ways you want to put that in there, or just a nice greeting like hello, I'm grieving, right? Like you can put these different tones to it, and where it gets straight to the point. You're introducing yourself, introducing a part of yourself, because grief does become a part of who we are. And I think that I'm statement in there really claims it and allows people to own their grief. And so with the merchandise, that's been a byproduct of this, is I wanted to give people another outlet for that, a way that they can express themselves without maybe going into a deep conversation if they choose to or choose not to, because at least it becomes a conversation starter, or other people might see you wear the clothes or wear the bag or wear the hat, and they'll see a reflection of them. that they can walk around, no matter where we are. They're going grocery shopping and you have the hat on, and somebody says, oh my gosh, like I am too. And they see somebody who is experiencing that same thing. So, I mean, I kind of had to push through a lot of that judgment of, gosh, what are you thinking? Like you're putting grief on clothes, and you're being so bold that way. But I think it's another way to get the conversation started. And again, for people to own their grief and acknowledge it in a way, because anytime when I made the first prototype, I had a little bag that I would carry, and people would come up to me and people would say, hey, here's my story, like I'm grieving too. And they feel safe. It's almost like with the inclusion work that I do, it's kind of like when I have safe zone stickers for the LGBT community, like when I've had that in my offices before, people know this is a safe space for you to enter. And so I wanted to create that safe space through the Hello, I'm Grieving brand, so that other people can have that awareness. And that's what it is. It really is a brand awareness.
And I love the notion what you said. You said, I'm putting my heart literally on my sleeve. And I remember when I first saw the first couple of things that you released, I was taken aback. I was like, oh, that's a lot. And I had this
Yes.
visceral reaction. I was like, oh, like I've never really thought of showing it on an outward sort of way. And then the more I sat with it, the more empowering it felt, because
Mm.
it felt like, you know what, I am grieving. And sometimes I don't want to have to verbally communicate that to somebody. And it's such a nice way to show that you're part of this. In a way, it's this club that you never really want to be a part of
Yes,
or join.
exactly. Exactly. Yeah, that's why even one of the products says, Hello, I'm Grieving Club, right? And so, and also to know that we're a part of this community. And it's become this unspoken community, but once you're in it and you find your people, you're able to move towards that healing and able to talk more openly. Because like what you said is, it's like whether, you saw something I was posting, you're like, she gets it. And sometimes that's what we need. We need somebody to just get it.
Yeah, and in reading what you were putting out there, I learned a lot about your story and your story about your sister. I wonder if you would like to share a bit more about that.
Sure.
Mhm.
Yeah. And it's also connected to this, right? Is because, I wouldn't be doing any of this if my sister didn't pass away. And so my sister passed away in February of 2020, and she had an autoimmune disease called lupus. And so what essentially happens is your body reads like your blood cells and your different internal functionings as if it's attacking you. So in essence, your body attacks itself. So then it leads to a multiple organ failure, which she ultimately passed away from. But this she was diagnosed when she was 16, and there are different things that happen with lupus, but ultimately what culminated is, it started off with her kidneys failing, and which then put her in the hospital. And that probably lasted anywhere from, that's with grief, right? You lose track of that time. And so like about 9 months, close to like a year, that we were in and out the hospital. And this is also a point when I'm very aware of the privilege that I had, because I'm very aware that I had the privilege to actually be with my sister in the hospital, where I know a lot of people didn't get that opportunity, and that hurts. Like I know I will never feel that to the extreme, but I always want to let people know I'm aware of that privilege that I had, and how I was able to, and our family was able to always have somebody there with her and take care of her, and that was hard because we had to watch her fight and we had to be in it. And I think that really did make me just own again, like I'm grieving. After she passed, I had to really own that for me to get to that next level of trying to continue to live on and trying to continue to heal and impact others. Because there's a thing called anticipatory grief, where when you're in it, especially if you're caretaking or if you have you know that space to understand what could potentially happen that could result in death, And I wish I would have known about anticipatory grief, because I feel like and anticipatory grief is the grief that you feel while that person is still alive, but you may be anticipating their death, because there is still that sense of loss. You're still going through, which I know people refer to as the stages of grief. However, it's not stages. I always like to make that clear. Um, but maybe it's like guidelines of like, this is what you may experience. And I was experiencing a lot of those even while my sister was alive. And if I would have known about anticipatory grief, I think I would have been able to process things maybe just a fraction better. That would have been helpful. And I would have been able to have even better conversations or prepare for her death. Because when you're watching someone, go through that process, it can be very, very difficult. But I'm sure I'm speaking to the masses here where we get that. We understand that on some level. So I think after she passed, and I'm not one to sit still, again, how it flowed into owning. I was walking by my house one day, and actually it was a conversation I had with myself where it was like it hit me up the side of the head, like, hello, you're grieving, right? Like, own it. And so that's where it all started. And I think even with launching the brand, it's been a real way for me to connect with my sister still. Because I have to think about her when I do this. I have to think about the purpose, and the purpose is her. The purpose is figuring out a way to still honor her and to keep her alive. And we always had this thing where we would always talk about, how are we going to start a business? Like, we need to start something, and and do things together, which we had in the past. And so I kind of feel like, okay, this is our business together. Like we have it, and we can still do it and impact others. And she was a nurse. She put herself through school. She raised two beautiful children. And she was just the strongest person that I've ever known. And so I want to do something to honor that. And I think this is it. And also with that is, the hopes of this is to grow this. Like, I have a big vision for it, to where it will then result in us being able to give proceeds back to grieving families, because I also know the financial consequences of, if you experience the loss of someone who might have been the financial breadwinner, or experiencing hospitalization costs, that can take a toll on a family, or even providing for family members that are still here with us, right? And so when I do think about my sister's kids and what that's going to look like for them, but also meeting some of the other families that talk about the stresses that they have, I want to be able to give back and also give this a purpose as well. So that's the ultimate goal, is to be able to give back to other grieving families, or even help with like funeral costs, right? Like, those can get really big with planning there too. So a lot of big visions for this, and we're just starting. So hopefully people understand it like you do, and we can keep spreading that message.
And that definitely comes across in everything that you do and the way you speak about. And thank you for sharing, your story with your sister. I really appreciate it. That definitely comes across, because everything that resonates and everything that comes from, the Instagram page and the merchandise, it feels like a love letter to your sister.
Mm.
And that's the way it comes across to me, because it just feels like I'm connected to this person even though they're not here.
Thank you. That's so nice. And I guess it is, right? I love how you put that. It's a love letter. And I think it's my expression of how I'm able to do that. And sometimes it's hard. Sometimes when I'm writing the posts, it can be hard, because I do want to be honest with people, and I want to show other people they can be honest too. But it really is a love letter. Thank you for saying that, because I like looking at it that way.
Yeah. And what resonated with me is, we share such a similar story in the sense that, and I haven't really, and listening to you talk about your sister, and talk about your sister so lovingly and so, oh, sorry, give me a second. I'm like, do not cry, not in the first 10 minutes. Um,
And it's okay if you do, right? I think that's one of the best things, is being around people who understand that. Yeah.
yeah. And one of the things you mentioned earlier was anticipatory grief. And I'd never heard of it in that term, because we share such a similar story in that, my mom was hospitalized for a very long time, well, not a long time, for a few months,
Hmm.
while she was being diagnosed with motor neuron disease, or ALS. And throughout that process, when she was being diagnosed and she was in the hospital, I was receiving therapy for something else anyway. And that focus of the therapy just shifted very naturally to what was going on. But I didn't know there was a term for grieving for someone whilst they were still with you.
Yeah. Yeah, that it blew my mind. And so again, that's why, with educating ourselves about grief, and why I wanted to become a grief educator, is so that I could help people, with, especially with people coming to the page. And I can only imagine, it's almost as if I want to give out the education that I wish I would have had, right? Because there are absolutely people that are going through things that their brain can't process it if they're in the midst of it. But if they had that little, nugget of information, then that could potentially help them, or urge them to do something that they might not have tried before, and it could be helpful in some way. Because I get, again, people aren't talking to you about it. I think for me, even understanding the medical field and the process, and that's something else I want to investigate too, is what's the grief education that our healthcare providers are getting. Because there were definitely some times where I wish somebody would have just told me, like point blank, like, is my sister going to die or is she not? And be real with me, so that I could start the process of trying to figure everything out. And sometimes I think we think people are going to be hurt so much. We're going to be hurt anyways. It's already a tough situation, especially if you're in a long-term process of essentially watching someone die, right? And I've even had to get used to even saying those words so point blank and so honestly, and say death, say dying, and all of that, to come to terms with it. And sometimes I wish I would have had that language to use. And the more language that I've learned in this grief space, it has been very, very helpful, for me as well. Like, I also think because my sister's death anniversary is coming up on February 12th. And I think I learned it's called Thanosversary. And so it's I think it's like Greek or Latin that means death, but it's another way to, instead of, if you don't want to say death anniversary, you can say Thaniversary. And maybe it sounds more elegant and better, but at least it gives you an option to use. So there's still a lot of things that I'm learning, and the more that I can help educate people, then the better.
And one of the things you mentioned there was language. It's the language that we use that I don't know if it's just a societal thing or a Western thing, maybe, I don't know, but we don't say dying. We don't say this person is dead. We don't, even saying it
Yes.
now made me feel uncomfortable to say. And I
Yeah.
sort of like, held back from saying it really loudly. We don't,
Yeah.
we say passing away, or it's very softer language that we use. And I
Hmm.
wonder where that comes from. And I don't expect anyone to know the real or the succinct answer, but it feels like as a society, we don't encourage conversation about death. It's
Sure.
certainly not brought up,
Yeah. Yeah.
at least within my circles, outside of my therapist circle or immediate family, it's not brought up.
Hmm.
And there are sometimes some days that I just think, I need to talk about this, but I don't want to be like the bummer at a party,
Yeah.
be like, you know what, guys, I'm not having a great day. And I started calling it, I'm having a grief day.
Okay. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it just signals to somebody else that, I'm not sad, I'm not emotional, I'm just contemplating, it's a thinking day. And I might
Hmm.
not be the usual self that I might be ordinarily. And I mean, that's one way I've started communicating it to like immediate close friends so that they know what kind of day I'm going through.
Yeah. And I think that's great. I think even if we can come up with our own language, right? And I think having a grief day is, especially if you're explaining that to friends, family, so that they get it and they can understand it. And that's the beauty of language, for us to communicate something so deep and intricate in just those two words, like grief day. And people are like, okay, I got you. Um, and I think the language, I'm with you on understanding our society and figuring that out. I also think culturally it could be something different, right? I'm sure there's plenty of cultures who talk about death and they're okay with it, right? They celebrate death. I think even, cultures that you see here in the United States, my dad's from Louisiana, so I know in New Orleans, people typically think about Mardi Gras, but their funeral processions are celebratory, right? They go marching, they have a band, people don't dress in black, they dress in white, and it's like a celebration. And we can see that in different cultures globally, how that shows. And I think that also speaks to how open are people talking about death. But I think you're right. It's people think that death is so dark and it's so gloomy, and which it is. There are parts of it that are. However, I've even been learning about stories where death has been an experience that people can be grateful for, that if they've prepared for it, if they're able to tell people exactly what they want. And that's why I'm, even now, this has put my life into perspective where I want to plan for my own death. I want to make sure that I'm prepared, that other people know what I want, which also I think happens in our society is that we don't. And so what happens when somebody does die and pass away is there's a lot of people that are left to pick up the pieces. And that can cause even more stress within family, and friendships as well.
As well as financial stress as
Oh,
well.
yeah. Yeah.
Having to pay for funerals, or if you have a mortgage on your home, it's and that's one of the things that I was very lucky with in that sense, because there wasn't a lot of that financial burden when my mom did die. And so and I appreciate that it's a very privileged point to come from, because a lot of people don't have that.
Sure.
And something you said earlier just reminded me of a conversation I was having with a friend. And if she's listening, she'll know who she is. I don't want to say her name or anything, but we were having a conversation about somebody she knew who, was very terminally ill. They weren't in the sort of like end stage of dying, but they were terminally ill. And I was explaining how in my culture, so I come from a Hindu sort of Indian background, we believe in reincarnation. And so death is almost seen as a release more,
Mm,
and it's seen as, you're not bound to this earthly world where this is the pain and this is the suffering and that's where this happens. And so death is seen as this release from everything that sort of holds you back or holds you down.
mhm.
And thinking about it, it's so different talking about it contextually, and then when you have someone in front of you,
Yes.
and they're going through these stages. And I appreciate our story might be different to other people's, where it might happen more suddenly and their loved one has died very suddenly or as a shock. Um, but suddenly thinking about, it's okay, she's not in pain anymore, or she's gone to whatever, whatever religion or whatever you believe in the afterlife. And I kept having to say that as almost like a mantra, because
Mm,
at the time I was, understand me, you're in bits, you're in pieces, you
yes.
you don't know left from right, and you're holding on to anything that you can grab onto. And
Yeah.
that rational part of you isn't always the one at the forefront that you're thinking of.
Oh,
It's the
yeah.
emotional part that sort of takes over.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point that you bring up too, because there are people who experience sudden deaths, right? And that in itself is a shock to your system, and just all the emotions that come into play. I think that really adds to how complicated grief is, because we can have these beliefs, we can understand death, we may have been there to support somebody else who had experienced a death or loss in their family, but then when it comes to us and it hits home, it hits completely different, right? Even to the point now when I see other people, it makes you more empathetic as well, because when you now see other people who are experiencing that same thing, there's no doubt that there's part of me that feels it, or it activates the grief again for myself. And not to be selfish or anything, it's just, it's that awareness. It's, I'm aware that it's hurting. I'm aware that you may be struggling, and it just, it heightens your awareness overall. Where some people, I never want to say like, oh, I'm grateful for this because I had to be grateful because my sister died, right? Like I will never be happy that my sister died. Um, and and there's still this new life, and I guess maybe new perspective. I mean, you're going to live a new life because the person that you love is no longer here. So the world is going to be different to you. And so, but it does give me new perspective on things, just relationships that I have with people, how I carry myself, the things that I say, even just how I look at trees outside. you know your perspective really does change, and I think my empathy level has been boosted way up now.
Absolutely. And I think for me, things that felt important after my mom had died,
Wow, yeah.
they weren't important. Not really.
Hmm.
Does it really matter that, you know, something in my job really irritates me? Does it really matter? These little, and not to say little, but these other things that felt so superfluous just melted away.
Yeah.
And it's not to say like I achieved some Zen status. I'm still,
Yeah.
human, and I still get irritated and angry and I still cry, but
Hmm.
it really gave me perspective on what's actually important,
Yeah.
and what's important now, what's going to be important, a year or 2 years from now. And
Hmm.
everything else didn't bother me as much.
Yeah, yeah, for
So,
sure. I definitely align with you on that as well, especially how you mentioned job things. And, I, even looking back, I think even thinking about guilt that comes from grief is, while I was in the hospital and visiting my sister, as much as I could, and we're rotating family members, in that same time, like I was a workaholic. And that's something that's just in our family. Like we work, 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 work. And, there were even times, and I think I shared this on one of my posts, of just how selfless my sister, is/was. People can use their own descriptors there, is that as she's laying in this hospital bed, it's like, it's uncomfortable. There's painful moments. And I'm sitting there trying to get work done while I'm in the hospital, and it's like nighttime. And she's just like, you can, because I think I had turned the lights off and I had like one little like flashlight thing, or I was using my phone. She's like, you can turn the light on, like it's fine. I'm like, no, like, because she knew I was doing my work, and she was a workaholic too. But even like in those moments, when I think back on that, it's like, yes, there's guilt surrounding, and now I think I've learned that lesson of what is important and how I can try to be more present. It's still a work in progress. I'm not perfect. It doesn't just switch like that, like you were saying. But it really does make you evaluate your time, the things that you're doing. It's my goal for this year to actually, like, I live in Los Angeles. I live in a place where people come to vacation, and I want to experience things here that, I don't want to take for granted, and to be able to use my time in a different way. And that's something that I feel like, looking back, she wanted to do as well. And sometimes we take on those wishes from our loved ones, right? That like, hey, how can we do something that maybe you wanted to experience, and you wanted to do, and look at it from that lens as well.
yeah, and in a way, how do we honor somebody
Mhm.
and carry on what they were like, and who the essence of who they were, in a way? And I'm still trying to figure that out. I think
Yeah.
it's been a journey. I'm not gonna lie.
Hmm.
And I'm still trying to understand, because I still have conversations with my mom, like what would she think about me doing like this, or going for a
Yeah.
different type of job, or applying for, a master's, and I always think like, what would mom say? And it's one of those things that you just want to be able to have that conversation. And you
Yeah.
just feel the essence of that person.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you talk about that. I think I never want to tell people like, oh, it's going to be easy. You'll be grieving and then this, because, it never really, it's that cliche, like it never really ends. And it's when the talking piece, like even when you said that, it resonated with me because it's going to be 2-year anniversary coming up in February. And I still don't have the conversations that I want to have with my sister. Even with the writing, I think that's also why the social media platform helped, because I felt like it's not really me journaling, but really it is. But it was a way for me to do that because I used to journal a lot more. But when my sister died, or even when she was in the hospital, I couldn't bring myself to write. I couldn't bring myself to write. I couldn't bring myself to talk with my sister when she was here and in the hospital. And I couldn't bring myself to talk to my sister, even now, because, and I thought I would. Like that's one thing that I thought it, and to where you think this is how you're going to grieve, and then it totally throws you for a loop. And I thought, oh, I'll talk to her, I'll write in my journal, but I didn't, and I'm still working towards that, even though I know how much that will help. And sometimes that's the hard thing about grief is in a way, we know what can help us, but taking that step to actually do it can be very hard. And I think that goes back to when I say, how can you say hello to grief is, how do you acknowledge it? How do you actually let it in, open the door and feel the things you need to feel, because that helps you with the processing. So I've made it a point this year that I get up every morning and I meditate. I set aside an hour in the morning. So I try to use that to meditate. And then I have some books that I read, and then like a little snippet from, and then I journal. And so that's been really eye-opening for me because it has allowed my emotions to flow through. It has allowed me to actually setting aside that time. It's my private time. Nobody disturbs me. I know exactly my purpose there. And then that's where I try to talk to my sister, and I try to connect with her and try to listen, for, because I believe in, if you just listen close enough, you can hear something. And so that's what works for me. It may not work for everybody, but I do think in those early days, where, I mean, I guess I'm still in that process where I just couldn't bring myself to talk to her out loud or even internally or even write my emotions down, is because I knew if I did, it meant that it was real. And so that has been the hard part, is just admitting this is real life. This is how it's going to be. And that's hard to admit. I mean, there was one letter that I did, which I am very grateful for, that when my sister was in the hospital, I I couldn't bring myself to ask her. Like I couldn't bring myself to talk to her about what if she dies. And so I wrote in a little book. And so I was just like, I wrote a letter to her. And in that, I told her that I'm worried about you dying. And so it's like and I just gave it to her. I was like, here, read this. But I think also how, I'm also half Filipino. So I think in some Asian cultures, we don't talk about our emotions so much. And so I think she read it and I could tell that she took it in, but we never had a conversation about it. So it's one of those things where I feel like at least I told her and I feel like she knew, but I also do feel like it was probably hard for her in that space to even say it out loud or have that tough conversation. So I know I probably went long-winded there and off course, but though that moment just came to my mind, and it will be something I'm grateful for. And it's also something that there's also there's still that guilt. There's always going to be that guilt where I wish I would have talked about things more, right? So those are some things, even just people that are living now, I'm trying to even push myself to convey those messages of how much I care for them, how much I love them. And that can still be hard. But that's something that's a goal of mine to be, again, just more outwardly. verbal and to let people, it's that, again, cliches everywhere, but like to be able to let people know before it's too late.
I love that you were able to have that moment with your sister, that, you're able to give her the letter and then she was able to process it in her own time. And even though you weren't outwardly verbalizing it, it was still communicated.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's just so special because in terms of the guilt that you were talking about, there are so many things and so many conversations that I wanted to have and I didn't know how to have. And, we had palliative care very involved in the care of my mum. And, they were really great with me and my brother. Like, I can't fault them. They were so supportive. And I was almost asking them to initiate conversations because I couldn't do it. And there were things that were being said, and I was in that room and I was just in tears and I couldn't do it. So I had to rely on, I suppose, the professionals in the room to help initiate that kind of stuff. But even coming back to that guilt, I found that that hasn't gone away. And I thought it would in a way. I don't know why, but I thought, you know, that guilt has almost stayed with me. And in a way, I've identified with it a little. Not that I meant to, but it almost feels like it's a part of that grieving process.
Oh, sure. Mm-hmm.
And not
Yeah,
just the guilt of the conversations you didn't have, but also the guilt of I get to keep going.
yeah. Oh,
And
wow. Yeah.
I have to live a life without this other person.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I've never known my life without my mom in it. And
Yeah.
I'm trying not to cry here, Julie. And so for me, imagining a life that doesn't involve her or where I don't have that person as an anchor, I didn't know what to do. And I still
Oh,
don't
yeah.
to a certain extent.
Oh, yeah. And it's a process, like you're saying. And I think sometimes we think that process is just going to end when it's something that's going to be continuous and it's going to take many different avenues to try or different things to do. And I think with the guilt, one thing that we learned through the grief educator courses is, how can you assign, truths to that? Because we look back, and I think one of the examples that was used is, if there is a sudden death that occurs, and some people, they always go back whether they think, oh, if I would have done this, or if I would have done that, things would have been different. However, if we take a step back and really break it down and ask ourselves like the truths of the matter, because some people might feel guilt, they might feel like they were the cause of a death, right? And it's even, I think somebody had been talking about how maybe their son had passed away suddenly, but they were in another country. But it's one of those things is, you know, could you have really truly have known that this was going to happen? Like, what's the truth of it, right? Like, would you have been able to fly across the country and be there at that moment, right? And do you have a superpower to know that like this would have occurred? It's I mean, I know I'm saying that very fundamentally and probably not saying it in the best way. However, it is really breaking down those truths. And so for me, like some of my truths were, was I even aware of what was happening? You know, um, did I understand the realities of it? And asking myself those questions, or, you know, do you really think you were in the mindset to be able to acknowledge this or know this? And you might play back and forth these battles in your head of like, yes, well, you should have done this. You should have done that. But if I really take that moment to really own like who I was and what I was experiencing in that moment, I don't think that that would be my truth, that there would be a way that I would have known, or that, like I wasn't able to be, I was with my sister probably those few days before she passed. Um, and then I was tired, right? Like, and I always go back, I'm like, well, she was tired, but and I was driving like back and forth. Um, and and so it was somebody else's day that day, right? They were like, okay, take a break it can be, mom's day to go in there. And, I wasn't able to be there. And it was sudden that happened, right? Um, just because of some more complications that she had. And so it's like for me, I beat myself up that I wasn't there for her in her last moments. Um, but again, I go back like, how could I have known? Like, how could I have known? And so it's really like for me, again, I always like to preface with those two words, for me, like, so because I know it's going to be different for everyone. And those are ways that I try to absolve that guilt, or at least quiet it down for the moment, and try to reframe it in those ways, but really trying to think about like what was really the truth, and kind of being like a private investigator, and really figuring out the truth, right? Because a lot of us, and when it goes back to that blame, right, of was this my fault? Could I have prevented it? We go through all these different cycles, and it's really breaking it down to the truth of the matter. And could something have changed, right?
Exactly. And I wonder how much of it is linked to forgiveness, just being able to forgive yourself for, not being at the right place at the right time, or not being more aware of what was going on, or being more present, or having more meaningful conversations. And it's the what if.
Yeah,
You
and those are
just
those are the ones that can eat you, right? And I think sometimes if your true goal is to like go towards healing, is kind of its focus on that, right? Our mind is going to go on what we focus on. And there are people that it does become very, very difficult for them, and they can get into the very depths of grief. That's why I'm always encouraging people to try something, whether it's getting outside and walking, or whether it is going to therapy might not work for everyone, but it's something that worked for me, and it's something that I've had to try multiple therapists, and I know that can kind of be hard to do, but at least try. Try anything really, right? That can be productive and that can be positive, because there is an outlet there that maybe you didn't know you would stumble across, and it can help. So I mean, who was I to think that Instagram would help me? and, and it's like I tried something. I heard it on a podcast and I tried it. And if it doesn't work, okay, on to the next, and do that. And so I mean, even one of the things that I want to do with Hello, I'm Grieving, and especially because knowing the effects of being outside, knowing the effects of how physical activity can help with our endorphins, with our brains, with serotonin, all that good stuff, is I want to do some grief hikes out here in Los Angeles. Hopefully it spreads out. We could have different events happen, but I want to do that. Like I want to bring the community together, and so we can also stay safe and be outdoors, but give people that opportunity to even like walk with their grief, and to have a safe space where they can meet other people that are grieving, and do some healing things at the top of our hike. So hopefully you'll be able to put those together here soon, and to be able to give people another way to try to release that guilt, to hear from others, to connect, and to process their grief in a different way.
I love that idea. I love that idea of a grief hike, because
Yeah.
most of what I've known is very therapy based, and it's very, you can do it on your own. And that's what I've
Mhm.
done for this whole time. And I've only just started to go into group therapy.
Oh yeah.
And whoa, that was a lot.
I liked
Um,
it. I like grief therapy. Oh, group therapy. That's
did
what's
you?
worked for me. Yeah.
In
Yeah.
what way? I'm interested.
Yeah. So right when my sister passed, I was like, I need help. Like, cause I'm a wreck. I need help, and I do not want this to prolong like this. I needed to be proactive. And so I used BetterHelp, which is a app online that you can, oh, you use that one too? Yeah.
I used it for a different problem a couple of years ago, but yes.
Yeah. And so I was like, okay, this is all I can handle right now. Let me just try it. So I tried that, and it was, I could do it face to face. I could do it over the phone. And so for me, what worked out is I just did it over the phone. And that was a good start for me. And then I was recommended to go to group therapy. And again, this is the beauty of when you speak and tell people you're grieving, is because I would never have been able to have been linked to this group therapy if I was at church. Like, it was like the week after my sister died. And I went to church, and something moved me to just stand up and like kind of tell. They give us an opportunity to all stand up. I have a really great inclusive church that that I go to called New Abbey here in Los Angeles. And, we share news there. And so I just shared that news and was crying and everything, because it was only a week after. But again, I knew I needed something. So I was like, maybe something spiritually I needed, and just surrounded by people. And so I told people what happened. And after that church day, a woman came up to me and said, "Hey, thank you for sharing all that. There's this great group called Our House here in Los Angeles, and they have group therapy." And so I was like, "Okay, I'm gonna call. I'm gonna see where this leads me." And I got into the group, and it was a very specific niche group, which I loved. And they gave me options, but I'm glad I got put into this group where it was for people who had experienced the loss of a sibling within the past year. So we would all kind of be in that same mindset. And the group started out big, and that's why maybe it's for some people it's not. And it was done virtually. And then it started narrowing down. So we ended up maybe with about 6 people, a good 6 that we were there. And I think it was about like a 9-month program. So we met like every other week. And so you really get to connect with these people. You get to know their siblings. You get to, and that space was the space where I had my biggest breakthrough, I feel like, where I felt like it helped me the most, because it really was that space where I could talk about whatever and say whatever I wanted to say, and nobody would judge me for it. And you never felt like you were judged. And you got to learn about other people's experiences and how they were doing it. And you got to see the different, some people were able to still smile and laugh, and some people were, a wreck, and that was all okay. It was all okay. So you got to see all these different ranges. And we still stay in touch. Like, our group still stays in touch. We got together for dinner, like, after I think I'm supposed to be planning another dinner for us to get together again. So it's like, now you always have those. We have a group chat now. So it's like, now if I'm having a grief day, right, I can say that to them. And I can tell them what's happening, whether they choose to reply or not. At least I know it's a safe space that I can vent and that I can like tell them everything. And it was the first place. I know I cried in my one-on-one, but it was really the first place that I felt like I had a space to cry. And I wasn't crying. Like, that was the only place that like I really would cry. Other than that, when I was, out of therapy and walking around this earth, I really held a lot of those tears in. And that was a space where I felt like, okay, I'm going to get to cry tonight. Like, I'm going to get to put that out there. And that in itself was therapeutic. That in itself was a really good release for me. So I'll forever be grateful for that experience with my group. And again, that's for me. That's what was helpful. And that's where I can really pinpoint where I had a breakthrough, because you could see the growth from how we all started until the very end. And like, to where we could make jokes at the end of it, and it's a commitment. And we also said, we ended up actually looking forward to coming like every other week, where we were like, oh yes, like, as much as we had going on, we knew we were dedicated to that space, and we felt responsible to the other people. We felt accountable to the other people in that group to show up, and help support them. So I think that's also a really good thing about group.
That's given me a bit more hope in
Okay.
terms of group, because I've
Yeah.
always done one-on-one, and
Hmm.
it's virtual because of COVID and
Yeah.
everything. But I did the group therapy with Untangled Grief, who are really great.
Oh,
And
uh-huh.
it was just so intense. And I thought, whoa, this is a lot to take on. But the more I sat with it, I just sat with, okay, don't shut off emotionally, don't do any of the rebound sort of core stuff that I always do. And the more I sat with it, I'm like, I don't have to explain anything to these people
Yeah.
because they just get it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't have to rationalize or justify anything. And there were people who were crying, people who didn't.
Mm-hmm.
And it was so okay. And so I'm so thankful to hear of a really good, positive group experience because it gives me a bit more hope to
Yeah.
continue with that.
And it's again, just like you want to find the right therapist, it's also about finding the right group, right? And it's okay if that group doesn't work. There might be another one that does, and find what works for you, right? And I think with groups, it really is it really gives you that opportunity to explore your own grief. Like I said, it was just a safe space for me to be able to do that. And it's like your emotions have to go somewhere. That's also from my grief education. So I studied under David Kessler, which is like the big name in grief, like attached to Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who, talked about the 5 stages, right? And so even learning from him and learning, how we're able to that's one of the best things that I've learned with my emotions and being able to express them in front of other people, especially in a group setting, is that our emotions need to go somewhere. And if you can sit with your emotions and ask it, like, why am I feeling this way? Or why is this the emotion coming up? You can discover a lot more. And then also, another big takeaway that I had from that is that there are no good or bad emotions. And that was very freeing for me to learn, because a lot of us assign crying or anger or things like that. Those are the ones that we see as negative emotions. Whereas, it's okay to be angry, and you need that anger to go somewhere. You need to be able to let it out, right? And because if it stays in, it can fester and become something else that could really be something negative. And so if we can understand that emotions are just emotions, they are what they are. There is no good and bad, because I think the bad is the actions that you may take. But if we aren't expressing these emotions and processing them, then that's where they can take to negative actions. But the emotions itself, they're just indicators. They're just another way that we're communicating. And I think when we can sit in that discomfort, especially when we're sitting across from somebody else and expressing that emotion, then that's where those real steps in our journey to like processing and getting towards healing can really happen. And it is going to be uncomfortable. And I'm a former athlete as well. And so I think that's also that something that has helped me, is because I have known what it's like to push myself outside my comfort zone and to sit in that discomfort and to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And because I know that's where that true growth happens. The true growth happens when you finally get out your comfort zone. And so that's what it's been like for me with emotions, especially, like I said, coming from a family who culturally did not express emotions. We were a family that may not have said, I love you, or given hugs or things like that. And so for me now to finally change and be like, it's okay if my niece and nephew see me cry. Like, it's okay if we have these tough conversations, that there's nothing wrong with it. So I think, and sometimes that takes other people, some time to get used to. But I think if they now understand where you're coming from, it can be very, very helpful in a lot of relationships, and the relationship with ourselves, to really understand our own emotions.
Absolutely. And I love what you said about, the emotions and just letting them pass by and not stopping them. And that some of these emotions, like the crying, it's not a bad thing. And that sort of resonated with me because very early on, I stopped apologizing for crying in front of people
Ooh,
very
good
early on.
one. Good
And I was
one.
like, because I think maybe in like a British way, you're just like very apologetic for everything. And I would apologize to like, the nurse or the doctor. And I was like, you know what? F it. Like, I'm crying.
Good.
this is what's
Good.
happening. This is really shitty right now.
Hmm.
Like, if I wasn't crying, then I'd be worried. So I stopped apologizing for crying in front of people. And then what I also stopped doing was stop labeling. Like, if friends were checking in with me and I was like in the middle of crying, I was like, I'm having a really bad day. And I stopped and I had to, it wasn't that immediate, of course, but I had to stop myself and be like, it's not a bad day to cry. It's not a bad day to miss someone. I'm
Mm,
expressing something. And like any other expression, it's just the way you do it.
correct. Correct. Yeah. I don't know why what you just said made me think of this. Because even when we think of anger, right? Um, and I don't know if I've ever shared this story, but I do think it's an important story that I do want to tell just because I feel like it's very helpful. Um, but when my sister passed away, and we were in the hospital, and so I was the last one left with her in her hospital room. And so and I'm thinking of my like what could be deemed as like negative emotions is I had my angry, like I had anger come out because one of the nurses came in and I was just trying to, I'm sitting there with my sister and process everything that just happened. And they said something along the lines of, well, they're going to come in and put her in a bag and then take her away. And then so I'm very grateful that I said what I said because I'm absolutely sure this will stick with that person forever. And I hope it did. But I was angry in that moment. I was angry in that moment that they just thought that it was okay to just tell me we're going to put her in a bag, right? That we're just going to put her in a bag and put her away, right? And when they could see that I was visibly distraught. And so I had a choice whether I just be with my feelings and my, you know, in my sadness, or do I get angry? And I think I questioned myself probably in a really quick second is like, why am I angry? And that like I can't sit here and let that be said to me. And I do feel, I'm understanding that person was well intentioned. Maybe they were like young in their career, but I definitely told them, I was like, never tell a family member again that you are going to put her in a bag. And I don't care if the whole floor heard me yell at this person at that point, right? It's because that was something that needed to be said. And that anger had a purpose. That anger came from this person needs to understand. Sure, they may have made a misstep in what they said, but I said, okay, maybe you'll say, hey, we're gonna take care of her. We're going to, make sure she's all cleaned up. We'll, make sure that we take care of everything for you and notify your family what to do next, right? They could have left all of that out. Just about we're gonna put her in a bag. Like, and so it's like I just have this image, you know, and so I think my anger had a purpose in that moment. And maybe somebody might think, well, you're yelling or you're doing this, and it's like, no, like, why am I yelling? Why am I angry? What is the message that I'm trying to convey? And so they were very apologetic, but I could definitely tell on their face that they knew, like, and that's why I really feel like that will stick with that person. So, and also in my head I was like, well, I could be hurting right now, but I'm hopefully saving another family from having to experience that type of language or what they would be told in that moment.
And thank you for sharing that,
Hmm.
because I had a similar experience, but I want to come back to that. But for me, whatever happens, they're the professional in the room. You're the one who's living it. You're the family member, the person, you don't have to control what you say or how you say things all the
Mm-hmm.
time, because you're the one who's literally grieving. They're the professional in the room. And what I was really angry at, and I love that it's angry, it's frustrated, it's is we
Mm-hmm.
were really fighting against the hospital administration,
Mm-hmm.
to get referrals, not physically fighting, of course, but like,
Sure.
you know I just wanted to get like, we were, to get referrals, to get things done, and me and my brother were put in a position where we became the professionals in the room. And
Mm.
I remember having this multidisciplinary meeting with the doctors, the nurses, the palliative care, everyone was there, and we had them regularly. I said, this is what you've done, and this is the scenario that's been created, and this is what's happening to me and my family as a result. And we've now become professionals in the room where we're having to fight for referrals. We're doing a lot of the personal care. And I'm losing that relationship with my mum
Mm.
because you aren't doing what you're supposed to be doing.
Mhm.
And similar to how you had that reaction with that nurse or whoever it was that said that to you, I felt like there was a shift in the room where they I hope at least some of them got it.
Mhm.
It's like, oh yeah, because I'm there all day doesn't mean that I have to do some of the duties that would have been done by somebody else.
Mhm.
I'm there to spend meaningful time and to care, because you will. It's your family, it's your mom, it's your
Yeah,
sister. You'll do it without question and
correct.
without hesitation. It doesn't mean that you have to do it
Mm.
because somebody
Yeah,
else isn't.
that's such a good way to think, right? Especially that time and how precious that time is. You know, that's a really good. I'm thinking about that now because, like you said, you're gonna do it anyways. Like I was doing a lot of stuff in there, and trying to understand everything and all the medical jargon, which can be so mind-boggling, right? And trying to understand that. And what's a good blood pressure, what's a good level, and hearing all the beeps and trying to understand everything, or changing garments, right? So it's not all pretty in there, and it can be exhausting. And I mean, I absolutely appreciate, because my sister was a nurse practitioner. I come from a family of nurses, so I do appreciate people who are helping. I just wonder, and again, this is me from an inclusion person, is I always give grace to the other side, because there are things that I probably don't understand. And I do think that there's a lot of validity in what you're saying as well, because like I've never thought of it that way. Like that could be time that I could be investing in some quality care. And I know how stretched our medical community is right now, right? I can only imagine what's happening in hospitals now and the burnout that's taking place. I wonder if there can be more conversations with patients and medical field folks to understand what could be helpful for both sides in that process. And maybe that's where the communication is lost. I think that's a program that I'm looking to be a part of as well, because I know they offered that after my group. They said that they wanted to take a few volunteers to talk with medical professionals to give them the insight from grievers. And I thought that was excellent, so that they can offer that to them too, and give them that space to communicate with one another.
And I can just see you being so good at that and being able to communicate it in a way that's not blaming or, not in an angry way, but with a purpose. There's an
Absolutely.
intention. And that's
Yeah.
what comes across from just having this conversation, from, your Instagram posts, your videos, it's the purpose that always comes across, and that always feels genuine to me.
Thank you. Thank you. That's my goal, and even when everybody, I don't get to everybody, because I'm not a social media guru by any by any means. I'm still learning. But when people, like I say, join the community or they follow, I'll always try to send them a message, and just, well, because if I'm all about saying hello, I need to acknowledge people that are here. So I try to say hello to everybody. And sure, not everybody responds, but that's okay, right? I respect that. And some people, and I try to explain to them I'm a real person. So if I don't get back to you in a timely manner or anything like that, like I'm actually a real person doing all this by myself. But there are people that, which I love. And it just takes that. It just takes for you to say hello. It takes for you, to say, this is my story. And I'm a firm believer, if you share your story, it allows other people to share theirs. So it does open it up. People will just tell me, this is what happened. This is why I'm here. And I appreciate that so much, because they don't have to, right? And in some way, shape, or form, I'd like to believe that helps them. That helps them, that even if they feel like I'm a stranger and they feel like this isn't even going anywhere, like at least they can get it out. some way, shape, or form. So again, it goes back to that purpose of how can I be of service and how can I make an impact? Because you really do truly realize you literally have just this one life, and what can I do with this one life? And I want to push myself to see what I can do.
Yeah. And that was the turning point for me because you actually do practice what you preach. Because I remember that very message you talking about, just introducing yourself, like, and I thought, wow, I didn't expect it, but I thought,
A lot
oh,
of people don't. A lot of people are
no.
so surprised.
And that made me want to like message back. And then we talked about the podcast and that sort of spurred on from that. And it was such a lovely way to be acknowledged. Like, I'm here. This is my story. I acknowledge that you have a story and you're going through something because you wouldn't be here if if you
Hmm.
weren't. And it was just a lovely, such a beautiful way just to acknowledge somebody else's presence and what they might be going through without having to expect anything from them because there was no
Yeah.
expectation to
No,
reply.
no, none at all. And I think what's been happening, some things I've been noticing too, which I appreciate, is now people are coming to the page because they are a friend or family member of someone who is grieving. So sometimes when I say hello, they're like, "Oh, I'm not grieving. Like I like nobody passed away like in my life, but my best friend had somebody, or another relative or a coworker, right?" And so they say they're just coming because they want to know how to support them. And I think that's beautiful. So I always commend them because I'm like, this is already a sign that you're doing something great for them. They might not be able to respond to you right now, or they might not be able to tell you that it's helpful, but in hindsight, it's going to be helpful for them. And I try to give them different ways that they can support that person in their life.
Yeah, because obviously for us, we're thinking of it from our own perspective, and I've been on the receiving end of other people where they didn't know what to say, and you could see that they weren't sure, and then they said something, and I was like, "Ooh, okay, I understand that you mean well, but maybe just don't say that." And I wonder
Yeah.
if there are things that you encourage people to reframe, perhaps, that might be more helpful for somebody who is sort of thinking of
Oh,
somebody
yeah.
who is grieving and
Yeah, one of the most helpful things that I've had, whether it's been told to me or whether like this is what I recommend to other people just because of my own experience, is when you say like, "Hey, I'm here for you," or let me know what I can help with, like I'll help with anything. When you're grieving and at that very like beginning part, which is when a lot of people will say that to you, it drops off tremendously. Like give it a week or two and it's gone.
oh
So
yes.
that's that's pretty much my reality there. But it is what it is. And you do see the true people that are there with you throughout it, right? They'll check in occasionally, which I've appreciated. But when that happens and you say, "This is, I can do anything for you," or "I'll be here for you, just let me know." It's more so be more direct and just say, "Hey, I'm going to be sending packages to your house. I'm going to come over. I'm going to mow your lawn. Hey, I'm going to come over and watch your kids, or I'm going to walk your dog for you." Like it's up to you if you're there to support that person in that moment. Come up with a couple things that you feel like you can do for them and just tell them that's what you're going to do. Because um, when you're in that state of mind, you have no idea what you want. You have no idea what will help you. And the more concrete people can be, or if you just do it, like I think what I really appreciated is I had friends send me like DoorDash or delivery food gift cards. And at that moment, I was like, I'm not going to do anything with this. I don't want to eat. So I'm not going to touch it, right? But when I started getting that appetite back, I was completely grateful. I was like, "Oh, yes, I have this gift card that I can use and they'll deliver it to me," because I didn't want to cook. I didn't want to get off the sofa. I didn't know, anything at that point. And so I was able to use that. An example of me not knowing what I wanted is one of my best friends. She actually works for this food company, and so she's like, "I can send you all this food." And so she was asking my wife. She was like, "Well, what does Julie want?" And then so my wife was like, "Hey, what do you want? Your friend is going to be sending you some stuff." And the only thing that I could muster was popcorn. I have no idea why I wanted popcorn or why that popped in my head. But because people are asking you these questions, you know, it was the first thing that came to mind. And so she sent me a lot of popcorn. but and amongst other things, but it's like that example of like, I have no idea what I want in this moment. So I think just be direct, say what you're going to do, and follow through and do it, because people will remember that.
And one of the things you mentioned earlier was that, you were still young in your grief. And you mentioned that your sister passed away around almost 2 years ago now.
Mhm.
And I love that feeling of, oh, sorry, I'm going to get emotional. Give me a
It's
second.
okay. Hey, we talked about emotions, right? It's completely fine.
It's
And I
true. I
think
might,
the more people who see this, like that's the reality of it.
yeah. And I think the reason why I'm getting emotional is because I thought, okay, grief lasts a certain period of time and then you get over it and then you just get on with your life. And I think that stemmed from, it was somebody who's very close to me who said, it's been 6 months. And with that kind of tone, I thought, it's only been 6 months. And so I had to literally change the tone of what they said to make sense for me. And
Mhm.
knowing that you still think that you're so young in your grief experience at 2 years makes me feel so much better.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I definitely. One thing that was hard for me with the time, and I don't know if you experienced this or if anybody else had experienced this, is it's hard to explain. Like, so my sister died on February 12th. And then it's like every day that went by and even going up to this year, it was so hard because it's like I felt that was me getting further and further away from her, right? And it's like I felt like I needed a closeness in the dates that, even if it was a week, I think that's when I just started feeling like, oh my gosh, like it's been a week. And I see, I even now, like, because when you're talking about, I can't explain it, but, and there was even some, I don't know, it's not necessarily guilt, but I think it's just some hard feelings. Maybe I can't verbalize that right now. But even in a year, I was scared of that first year marker because again, that reality sets in that I'm going to be counting now for the rest of my life, like how many years it's been or how many days it's been. And that year pulled me further away. But there was also this like other side of it where I was like, okay, I think maybe that only 6 months, like it's only been a year. So that means I'm still kind of close to my sister. Like it's very, but now it's like when it's coming up on this 2 year, the first year was all a blur. Like I have no idea what happened in the first year. It was very hard. But then going into this second year, it's been a little bit different, but I know it's going to be a whole process. Like I can't even imagine what 10 years is going to be like, right? So when I hear people reach out to me like it's been 10 years since my person passed away, and I'm like, gosh, and like you still feel it. And so I'm wondering, who will I be at that 10-year? What will my relationship be with my grief, with my sister, you know, after 10 years? But at least it's an indicator that it's going to be here forever. And so if you know it's going to be here forever, what will you do? And I think sometimes when we're talking about that time, is some people, they may feel guilty about, their grief and how they're processing it. But I think give yourself a little bit of grace, because if you know your grief is always going to be there, it's okay if you set it aside for a little while. Like if you take some time off for yourself, that's okay, because your grief will still be there waiting for you. So you can go ahead and pick back up that conversation or those feelings anytime you want to.
And I'm sure everyone is going to relate to that, who they're going to be in 10 years, in 5 years, or even the day after. And I almost feel like I'm sort of moving away from the actual date of my mum's death. And I'm mourning, not feeling those intense feelings in that way.
Yes,
But I'm really,
exactly.
I'm saddened by how I'm using that to stay close to her.
You said it. That's what I was trying to get to. Yeah.
And I'm almost grieving her, but I'm grieving the grieving process because it's getting
Yes.
less intense. And that's the only way I felt connected right now, anyway. I hope that
Yes.
changes.
You said that perfectly. Thank you for
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. And I want to thank you for your time today. I've really enjoyed speaking to you. I feel like we could literally talk for hours. But for anyone who wants to look at the content and find you, where can they find you?
It's really easy. It's Hello, I'm Grieving. That's why I think people haven't been talking about this because every URL was available. So at Hello, I'm Grieving on Instagram, and it's helloimgrieving.com. And so that's again where you can find, where you can submit your story to me. And then you can also find the Hello, I'm Grieving brand and merchandise there as well.
Perfect. And I'll put all the details down in all the description boxes below. But thank you so much for sharing your story. Thank you for being such a great grief advocate and creating this space and awareness and community for people to share with.
Thank you so much. Thank you. There's a car horn going off in the background. So I don't know if you could hear that now, but that's the virtual space. But thank you so much for having me. And I really hope your listeners enjoy this and they learn at least one thing that can help them in their grief. So thank you for what you're doing.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Julie.
All right. Bye.
Okay.